When I get up in the morning, I put God first, my family second, and I'm third. When you put God first, the enemy starts getting worried, starts getting shaking in its boots, because when you say, you know what, Jesus, I love you more than anything in this universe, everything else starts falling in place. And let me tell you, the spirit world knows there's a hierarchy. And if you've taken on the name in baptism, you already have dominion over them.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Between Sundays. This is Billy Haley and I'm with Pastor Tim Zuniga, and we are set up for a really exciting episode today. We told you when we launched Between Sundays that we were doing this because we were having so many great conversations at lunches or in conference rooms or at tables that so many people, they didn't have the privilege to be a part of those. And we wanted to basically open the curtain and let people into some behind-the-scenes stuff that we get the privilege of being a part of on a regular basis. And one of those things is that, you know, in our context of church, we get to bring people through on weekend experiences and preach, evangelists to preach to our church. And so this is one of those moments where we have an amazing guest evangelist with us this weekend. And I'm excited to be doing a podcast together with this gentleman. So, Pastor, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you, because I wouldn't be able to do it justice. I'm not going to be able to give the right introduction. So I want you to introduce our guest.
Yeah, what a great privilege to have Brother Nick Mahaney with us. This is definitely one of those individuals that you wish people hear the words, the stories, the conversation that's taking place around tables. I have been at those tables with Brother Mahaney and thought, man, I wish other people could hear this. They need to hear this. And so when this opportunity came up, I thought, we're going to take advantage of this. We're going to ask Brother Nick Mahaney to come in and be with us. So, Brother Mahaney, we are just delighted to have you with us on our podcast.
I'm delighted to be with you on this podcast.
Brother Mahaney, I want to just throw some questions, just kind of like we were at the dinner table or whatever, but we're going to start a little crazy here, okay? This is going to be a little bit, they may stop listening after this.
Yep.
But I will never forget the conversation you began to tell us. And again, when you were describing this, you were telling us, I don't share this a lot. Like, I don't tell a lot of people this because they think I'm crazy or they don't believe it, okay? But you began to tell us a story about Bigfoot, okay? And yeah, this is the truth.
Bigfoot?
And so, yeah, it totally took us into another realm, right? Like, okay, this is crazy. Do you mind just describing that story?
I'll describe it.
Look, people right now, like they didn't know what to expect.
Yeah,
We set them up, Brother Mahaney, like we're bringing all these great people, and we're about to open up with some Sasquatch.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I'm an avid hunter, and I spend a lot of time in the woods when I get a chance. And I was sitting in a deer stand, and I like to get there way before daylight. So it's about 45 minutes before daylight, and I smelled this horrible smell, you know, like 10 dead bears. It was horrible.
Wow.
And I started hearing this grunt and like a snorting sound and like something tearing up the ground behind me. And I thought, well, man, I don't know what's going on here. I've never had this experience. I've been around hogs, bears, everything. And then all of a sudden, I heard it go whoop, real ear-piercing loud.
Yeah.
And it started whooping behind me. And then I heard it beating a tree with another tree. It sounded like to me a tree limb. And I almost, I was very scared. So I laid my rifle down on the edge of that stand because if something touched my deer stand, I was shooting. And it was just coming up daylight. And, you get that feeling something's looking at you. And I'd look over to my left and standing about 45 yards from me, underneath a big tree, was this giant Bigfoot. And he was looking dead at me with menace in his eyes. Like, wow. I mean, every hair on my body stood up. I had to catch my breath. I'm going, and I got my rifle up and I throwed it up because I was going to drill him right in his big head. And he took off, and I could not get him in my scope. And my options were stay in that stand, and I even went and tried to track him. It was real soft. There's big, huge holes where he was taking giant leaps, you know. And my options was to go back to the house where the lady of the house, his pit bull, was running loose, and it hated me, or stay there with Bigfoot. And I went back to that house, and I fought that dog for like 15 minutes till I could finally get in the truck. So he's out there. I'm just going to tell y'all.
So we've had a lot of fun with this. Like every time
I've got Bigfoot socks.
Right. We bought you a Bigfoot mask. I mean, we've really, anything we see Bigfoot in our family, we think of Nick.
Yep.
You know, this past general conference, we're walking past you looking for our seats in church,
Yep.
and you're whooping at us,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like we've had a lot of fun. But what's weird is we've actually did research. Like we watched documentaries and things like that. Like, okay, what's this crazy thing? He's messing with us.
And the ground behind my stand was tore up like two big bulls fighting. And there was a big limb that ain't no way I could pick up. And that limb was laying by this huge pine tree, and he had beat all the bark off of that plant. That's what I was hearing whacking, that whack, whack.
Wow.
So you're a believer.
Oh, yeah. That'll make you a believer.
Okay, so
I once was blind, but now I see.
So, okay, I have questions,
Sure,
right?
go ahead.
And so is there one Bigfoot, or is it like, is it like a population of these Sasquatches?
They see him all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not he can't transform and move to, what do they call that? Shape shift?
Shapeshift, yeah.
Be careful.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know. It may be.
I mean, there has to be more than one.
Yeah. Well, I've never seen I've never seen a Sasquatch. So maybe one day.
Have you ever found like these trees broken up real high where you can't reach them out in the woods? I started noticing that stuff after I seen him in a little nest. I know. I just lost half my revivals.
Yeah, right there. Right. Like people, I'm out.
It's okay. Hey, listen.
Conspiracy theory.
Those people aren't listening to the podcast.
Hey, but I will tell you, my youngest son Thatcher, he's a believer with you.
Oh, I know he is.
He's a believer.
We're on the same page.
Yeah. Well, I think that story is so fascinating, and again, we reference it a lot and have a lot of fun with it. So, thank you for sharing that. Really, we want to talk about something a little bit more serious. One of the things that I've been privileged as I get to know you better. Again, we love you. You've been a blessing to our church and so many other churches. I mean, you're an international evangelist. You travel the world. I think in a few days you're going to the Philippines from here. And but I'm always intrigued. Your father was an amazing man of God. I mean, incredible prophet. These are words that others would call him. I mean, an incredible man used in the gifts. And again, he's passed on. God bless his soul. And so there are stories that and again, unless you share them, they will not survive either once you pass. And so. I just been fascinated by those. They inspire me. They increase my faith. They honestly make me aware of the world that we are living in, the supernatural realm. And so I'm just going to see if you don't mind just sharing a story or two about your dad that just reminds us of the spiritual realm that we are living in.
My dad was always a man of faith, and one of the earliest things I saw my dad do was we were in a home missions church, starting a church, and we were on our way to church one evening, and we went around the curve, and my little brother was leaning on the door, and the door flew open, and he fell under the car. You could feel it go over his legs. And man, my dad pulled him out. I mean, his legs were like a rag, a handkerchief. And I'll never forget. He went in, canceled church. He told my mom, said, y'all go home. And he carried my brother in that church and laid him on that altar. We had no money. My dad was working the night shift after he'd preach, and we had nothing. We didn't. This was like the early 70s, and my dad worked all night, and he had already told my mom, if God doesn't heal him while I'm at work, then I'm taking him to the hospital. And when he pulled up in the yard that night, that early morning, my brother was the first one that ran out. God had healed him. I mean, we ran. You could feel the car go over his body. And he was just that kind of man, a man of mighty, mighty faith. And he could, and when he believed that if he prayed it, God would do it.
Yeah, I've heard stories, so many stories, and your dad has a very powerful testimony. I mean,
Yeah.
it's crazy, right? Like slept in graveyards and led gangs, and I mean, crazy stuff, okay? So, I mean, the supernatural is something that became very important to your dad. You told us a story one time. You guys were in California. I think you're walking down a boardwalk.
Venice Beach.
Yeah. Can you describe that or just share that again?
Well, my dad was a character. He wasn't your typical prototype UPCI, preacher. And he always wanted to go see all the wild stuff. He loved adventure, even in his elder days. And we get off the plane. I hadn't been in church very long, and I had to get permission to leave the state from the probe office.
You had an ankle bracelet, right?
Yeah, well, close.
That's a whole other story, right?
And so the guy asked, he said, Brother Mahaney, where do you want to go? I'll take you anywhere you want to eat, whatever you want to do. And my dad looks at him and goes, I want to go to Venice Beach. Because he had heard that was one wild place.
Yeah.
And that guy, I'll never forget, he looked at my dad and he goes, Brother Mahaney, you don't want to go to Venice Beach. Where do you want to go? And my dad said, look, ignorant, you asked me where I wanted to go, because he called everybody ignorant. Right. Everybody. I want to go to Venice Beach. He goes, I don't think we should go, but I'll take you. So we had to park way up. My dad had a black shirt on, hadn't shaved, tattoos all over him. He didn't look like a preacher. And us three come walking down the street when we got to get to the boardwalk. And I'm telling you, when we put my dad put his foot on that boardwalk, they were having some kind of, I forget what it was called, but it was nothing but palm readers. There was swamis, they were doing all kinds. There was tarot card readers. There was people that had crystal ball, set up, and they would tell you future. And when my dad started walking down that boardwalk, the very first person on that boardwalk was a card reader, and he stood up and said, Charles Mahaney, what are you doing in our territory? We don't want you here.
Wow. And
they started standing up, calling out my dad's name. Evangelist, get out of our territory. We don't want you here. And I watched, I seen him in a whole new light. I right then I saw my father, who he was. He was a warrior for God. He knew he was tormenting everybody on that boardwalk. And he was walking down through there like he ruled the place. He even walked up there. There's a guy or a lady with a crystal ball. And my dad walked up and said, "Die!" and scared her to death. And he looked at her and said, "Didn't see that, did you, homie?" And we're walking, right? And I'm following my dad and this other guy, and I look at him, I go, "Hey, bro, they ain't calling me in your name one time." And there was a second story balcony, and it had a banner on it, Madam whatever, tarot card reader. And she screams and leaps off of that balcony and lands in between my dad and me. And she's crouching on the ground, and she is growling. Everybody in the boardwalk's watching us now. She's crouching, growling, hissing, spitting. And like I said, I'd just gotten in church. I was about to punch her right in the pie hole, And my dad turned around and looked at me and said, "Ignore her. She's powerless." And he walked down through there. I watched it with this lady crouching like a dog or something, growling, and he messing with everybody until he got tired of her, and he turned around and said, "Get out of here." And she ran screaming. And I went to my room that night and I said, "God, I don't know what's going on. I don't want to be a singer. I don't want to be a preacher. I don't want to be anything. I just want to be a warrior like him."
Wow.
And 3 years later, my dad passed away, and I met my wife. We got married. We'd just gotten married, and we were at a big rally, sectional rally, church rally. And the preacher preached and got done, and a lady come down to the front, and she had all these voices coming out of her when she was, demon possessed.
Yeah.
The guy preaching looked at me and he said, "Hey, won't you go pray for her?" I said, "You go pray for her." I said, "You're the one getting the check." I said, "You go pray for her." And I could see the fear on him. Yeah. And some kind of boldness came over me. And I said, "I got it. I'll pray for her." And I walked down there and I stood right in her face and I said, "I command every voice in the name of Jesus to be quiet. I want to speak to this lady." And every voice just like stopped immediately. And she looked at me in her right mind. And I said, "Ma'am, if you want me to, I'll cast all these devils out of you, but you got to want them to go." And very calmly, she looked at me and said, "I like them. I want to keep them." And well, my dad had told me, when you run across that, you just take them out because they're going to cause a scene. And me and the usher took her outside. She walked about 20 feet away from me, and she turned around and looked at me and said, "Nick Mahaney, why'd you leave us? We hate you." And I lifted my hands as high as I could in the air, and I began to scream, "They know my name." And I run through the back of that church screaming, "They know my name." And I began to shout and dance all around that place because they knew who I was.
Wow.
And the enemy knows who we are. If you're sold out, you want the supernatural, you can have the supernatural.
Brother Mahaney, there's a lot of interest. People, wondering, it is a gift, but all of us as believers, full of the Holy Ghost, have the authority in the spirit realm, right?
Right. And
it's real. We deal with it probably in ways we don't fully understand. I really would like for you to tackle that. For someone that's listening, for somebody that maybe even new, like they get what you're saying. They understand. They've been in situations where they felt things they cannot explain. They're dabbled with things. They may have seen things that they just cannot fully understand in the spirit realm. So what does someone do if they're saying, "You know what, I want them to know my name. I want to exercise that biblical authority." What do they do?
Well, as an example, the guy that took us to Venice Beach,
yeah.
he's no longer in the truth. They didn't know his name because they knew he was already compromising. And how they know your name is when you say, "Above all else, I'm living for Jesus." When I get up in the morning, I put God first, my family second, and I'm third. And if anybody ever wants to read a good book, it's called by Gale Sayers, the Chicago Bears running back, and it's called "I Am Third," and it's a powerful book about how we put God first and our family second. When you put God first, the enemy starts getting worried, starts getting shaking in its boots, because when you say, "You know what, Jesus, I love you more than anything in this universe," everything else starts falling in place. And let me tell you, the spirit world knows there's a hierarchy. And if you've taken on the name in baptism, you already have dominion over them, because Jesus, said greater things that we're going to do than he did. And here's the other thing, the demoniac that was cutting himself, he never spoke to Jesus. It's the spirits that spoke to Jesus. He didn't run to Jesus. The spirits made him run to Jesus, because they know there's a hierarchy. And when you put Jesus first and you're baptized in his name, you place his name upon you. And then they know your name. And what did Jesus do? Everywhere he went, he cast out devils, healed the sick, and raised the dead. I don't know how many times that phrase is in the Gospels. Cast out devils, healed the sick, and he raised the dead. And a lot of times we're looking for the spooky, and that's not how God operates. A lot of times casting out devils is going through your house and speaking to spirits is trying to attack your family through games, through movies, through music. That's casting out devils. And periodically I go to my house, and when everybody leaves to go to school and my wife goes to teach school, I walk in every room and I say, "I command every spirit that has tried to attach itself to my family that's in this house, I command you to leave this house. I go open up the cupboards, the closets, the bathrooms, and I push them out. Because if we don't cast out the devils, we're not doing what Jesus did. And we think it's always a physical manifestation. Well, no, there's a spiritual manifestation in your home that's trying to come against you, and that's the supernatural.
You know, you said you got to put Jesus first, right? And I think a lot of people, they've heard that, they feel that, and some people think that they're doing that, right? And we're living in a world now where Christians and unchristians alike, there's so much intrigue by the supernatural. Hollywood is trying to, put out all kinds of supernatural stuff, and people in the church are intrigued by it. They probably don't fully understand it. People listening right now have way more questions than they do have answers about the supernatural. But I love what you're saying about having to put Jesus first, and you're leaning into that. But in your travels and your experience, especially here in North America, in our Western culture, what would you say are things that, chances are that our listeners, things that are really undermining the work of the supernatural in our families and in our homes?
Well, we are made up of body, soul, and spirit. Our spirit never gets cancer. Our spirit never has heart disease because it's in tune with God. Our spirit was never meant to die. It's like Adam and Eve. And our spirit longs for him. It's our flesh that gets in the way of the spirit and it creates a problem. And so our spirits, whether you're in church or not, that spirit inside of you is longing for the supernatural. And if you don't put Jesus first, you'll get the supernatural. It may not be a full-on demon possession, but it's going to be demon oppression, or there's going to be things that's influencing your life that's going to keep you from being who you're supposed to be. But if your spirit, if you follow it, it'll put Jesus first. And everybody has a spirit, and it's longing to tune. Jesus said, "My spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak."
Brother Mahaney, what do you wish people understood about the supernatural?
That I wish they would understand that it's not something to be afraid of, that God's a gentleman. He's not going to embarrass nobody. He's not going to hurt anybody. He's not going to do the wrong thing. That's why the Bible says he's a righteous God, because he always makes the right choices. The supernatural is there. If we ever understand and tap into it, there's angels around us right now. The Bible says this: the angel of the Lord inhabits those that fear him. That means we have an angel. And that angel that's around us, that means he pops up a tent everywhere we go. He's with us. And that supernatural is there. It's not something that you have to get spooky over. All you got to do is put Jesus first.
You told me a story, and again we're coming to the end here. But you told me a story where you were lost. Your testimony is incredible. You were really out, okay, really out, and you're about to die one night, and God used your father to save your life.
Yeah, one of the many times actually. I was probably 28 and homeless. I had nowhere. I was strung out on dope, and I was just living on places I could break in and do whatever I could do to survive. And I was up under an overpass, and it was snowing, cold. It was in January, and I'm an outdoorsman, and my body started shaking, and I knew that's stage 1 hypothermia. And I knew if I didn't find shelter, I'd die quick. And so I broke in an abandoned house off John Barrow Road in Little Rock, Arkansas. And it was piled, it was just abandoned. There was just stuff in there, no lights. And my body was just shaking. And I thought, man, I can't get warm. And hypothermic, when you go into hypothermia, your body's shaking to try to warm your body. That's what it's doing. Then when your core drops a certain temperature, then you start feeling warm, tired, you go to sleep, and you die. Well, it's like somebody hit a switch. I quit shaking. I felt this warmth, got real tired, and I said this out loud. Well, this is it. At that moment, I heard a voice saying, "Nikki, you in there?" Well, my dad called me Nikki. And this is before cell phones. And I thought I'm having an outer body experience. Knocks on the door. "Nikki, you in there, boy?" And I opened the door of this abandoned house, There's snow everywhere. And he looks at me and I said, "Dad, is that you?" And he looks me right in my face and he says, "Get in the car, son, you're dying." And I'm like thinking, man, this can't be him. And I kept, pushing on him. "Is that you, Dad?" He said, "I told you it's me. Go get in the car." And we walk through the snow. We get in the car, driving down the road. I keep touching him. "Dad, is that you?" And he said, "I told you, boy, you're dying." And I said, "How did you know where I was?" Nobody on this planet knew where I was, not one soul. He said, "I was asleep tonight and an angel shook me. And when I awakened, I seen this angel and it had this like a card and it had this address on that card, and it said, 'Your son's dying right now. Go get him because God's not through with him yet.'" And my dad come and saved my life. I warmed up and left. It was I get chill bumps. It was 10 years later when I got in church. That's the supernatural. If we'll tune in, the angels of the Almighty God will be there to help us. Another story that comes to mind is I feel angels. I know when they're there. I'm going to tell you right now, there's angels in this room right now because I felt them when I began to talk about that story with my dad. They're in here. But the only one I've ever seen was in human form. And I know for a fact it was an angel. That I know for a fact. I was going through Chicago airport. It was a Saturday. I was trying to get there. I had to preach Saturday night in Toronto. And when I walked off catch my connecting flight, the board was flashing. Well, I fly all the time. I've never seen my flight just flashing like that. So I went and asked somebody that worked there, and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, you probably need to go get in line and talk to them. There's some problems today." So I waited in line. I got up to the lady, and I said, "Ma'am, what's going on with my flight?" She said, "Well, you're not going to be able, that flight's canceled." I said, "Well, I've got to preach. And tonight in Toronto," she said, "There's no way." She said, it'll be midnight or Sunday before anybody. She tried every airline. So I'm walking, it's HH. I'm going to go through there Tuesday. I'm going to walk by there and look at that place. But it's HH, and I'm walking back and forth, and I'm just, I'm praying, "God, what do you want me to do? I need you to help me right now." And you know how you can tell when somebody's staring at you? There was a bald-headed, chubby guy with a red beard, and he had his arms crossed, and he was watching me, smiling at me. And I thought, man, I think this dude's watching me, and I'm kind of nuts anyway, right? So I did a couple little figure eights just to make sure, and sure enough, this guy, he's eyeballing me. So I walk over to that little desk he's at, with the computer, and I said, "Can I help you with something?" And he looks at me, he goes, "No, but I can help you." I said, "How can you help me?" And he said, "The Lord wanted me to tell you something." I said, "Oh, he does he?" Being a smart aleck. He goes, "Yeah, the Lord wanted me to tell you, you have great faith for big things, but you have no faith for the little things."
Wow.
And I'm like, "Who are you?" And he goes on to reading my mail about some stuff, and he hasn't even asked me my name. And he goes, "Here's your ticket. If you'll walk through that door, you'll be able to preach tonight in Toronto." Man, I grabbed my ticket and I walked on the plane. I landed. Of course, I had to preach in like a Duck Dynasty T-shirt, but, wish he'd have got my luggage, but... And so I preached. My luggage finally comes in, and I preached 3 or 4 days in Toronto, and I'm coming back through Chicago. Well, I'm going to go thank this dude, man. He saved my day, my bacon, And I walk up to that gate, and there's 2 black ladies there. And I walk up, and I said, "Ma'am, where's the little bald-headed fat guy, with the red beard. She looked at me. She said, honey, I've been at this gate for 19 years. She's been here longer than me. There ain't never been
Oh my
a bald-headed guy
Wow.
with a beard. When she said that, chills went all over my body, and I remembered he never asked me my name. He had the ticket ready.
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing.
I knew it was an angel.
Yeah.
I just wish, like I said, they'd have got my luggage there. But
Yeah, I wish I could have seen you preaching in a Duck Dynasty.
happy shirt. Uncle Si.
You might be the only UPCI evangelist that's ever preached in a Duck Dynasty T-shirt for
Yeah,
sure.
probably.
That's awesome.
Fascinating.
Brother Mahaney, this has been fascinating. And, our deepest prayers, we want this to be helpful. We offer a challenge at the end of our podcast. Just if you're listening, what challenge could we offer our listeners after hearing all that you've heard, everything you're saying, the spirit of what we are? I mean, I feel God's spirit here as you're talking, man. Mm-hmm. What challenge would you offer people that are listening to this podcast?
There's two very strong things in humanity, in our flesh. You have to have water or you die. You have to have sustenance, food. You can only go about 40 days or so without food and you'll die. 3 to 5 days without water and you'll die. And the Lord said, those that hunger and thirst after righteousness will be filled. If you really want him, if you've ever been really, really hungry, I've been very hungry where I was starving before in my life. I've been very thirsty too, where I didn't know if I was going to make it another day. And if you get that kind of desire for Jesus and putting him first, that's what's happening at these colleges all around the nation. They're hungry and they're thirsty. And he said, if you'll hunger and thirst after righteousness, you'll be filled. And I challenge people to desire him as much as you desire that next plate of food that you have to have every day, or that drink of water that you have to have. If you'll start desiring him like that, he's going to open up things in your life you never thought was possible because you're putting him first and you're hungering and thirsting after him.
So good. Man, I just pray that whoever's listening to this would feel what we're feeling and recognize that God's called us in this time to be used in the supernatural. It's not just for a few. It's for all of us.
Everybody.
Every individual. So again, just thank you. We are so blessed with so many fantastic volunteers and just grateful for all of our volunteers. I think, Billy, who's our volunteer?
So this is a pretty fantastic young lady. Her name is Lacey Walmer. And so she has a favorite verse. And so, Pastor, you're going to share Lacey's favorite verse. Yeah,
in the context of her verse, she is heavily involved in our children's ministry and does so many wonderful things with our children. So shout out to Lacey Walmer, and her favorite verse is Matthew 18:3-4. Then he said, this is Jesus speaking, I tell you the truth, unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. So anyone who becomes as humble as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Way to go, Lacey Walmer. Thank you for all you do for our church. Again, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening to Between Sundays. And Brother Mahaney, thank you for joining. I think we're going to have him back for another episode for sure in the future. So
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Bigfoot's real.
Yeah, that's
a story.
I'm be honest. I'm still
go research it.
Yeah, well, I haven't. Because honestly, after
Bill
you
Haley
told
in
them,
the comments.
right? After you told them, they went. The things that this podcast, this probably won't even make it, but the things that hasn't been captured, of all of the things we've already experienced in this room. But when you told them that story and the research, they went deep. They went deep.
It is
research.
Deep. I'm telling you,
it's crazy.
Himalayas to Seattle, Vancouver, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky.
That's where I seen it, North Carolina.
That's amazing.